I'm 30 years old, and I share a house with my sister. We live in a 2-story house arranged in a sort of mother-daughter style, with 2 separate kitchens. My sister occupies the ground floor while I live upstairs. She's rarely around since she often stays at her boyfriend's place, which is about 20 miles away. At 30, I'd expect not to be easily unsettled by being home alone, yet sometimes it still gets to me. One evening, while I was alone in the living room watching a horror film, I experienced something I can't quite explain. My part of the house features an open floor plan where the living room, dining area, and kitchen merge into one large space. I was seated on my couch right in the middle, meaning my back faced a vast, shadowed area. For anyone who gets a bit jumpy, that isn't exactly the ideal setup for watching a scary movie. I must confess that, with only the flickering light from the TV battling the darkness, I kept glancing over my shoulder. I woke up around 1 a.m., and I wasn't sure why I woke up at first. Then I heard a voice downstairs. It sounded like my sister. I got out of bed and went into the pitch-black hall. I turned on the hallway lights and then made my way through the living room and heard my sister's voice again from downstairs. Now I could understand her to be saying my name. I headed down into the dark, shouting, "What's going on?" I fumbled for the light switch in the foyer, but couldn't locate it. Honestly, I was extremely groggy. I reached the small hallway leading to her kitchen, found a switch and flicked it on. As the light slowly illuminated the area, I scanned her tiny living space, yet there was no sign of anyone. I then went into her bedroom, which was completely empty. I called out her name loudly one more time, and although no one answered, I did hear something thud on the floor in her room, a room I had just checked. Feeling unnerved, I climbed back upstairs like a frightened kid and returned to my room where my phone was. I tried calling her several times, but she didn't answer. I ended up locking myself in, wondering if I'd merely imagined everything. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of texts from my sister asking why I'd been calling her at 1 a.m. When I asked if she'd been home the previous night, she replied that she hadn't. She was staying at her boyfriend's place. I even went downstairs to inspect her bedroom for anything that might have fallen, but there wasn't a single object that could have made that noise. I'm inclined to believe that I hallucinated everything I heard that night. I want to believe that, because the alternative is far more horrifying. I've never experienced hallucinations or any sleep disorders before, so the vivid clarity with which I heard my sister's voice and that mysterious sound in her room still sends chills down my spine. I was often left home alone as a kid because my mom worked long, grueling shifts as a nurse while my brother was away at college. One weekend night, I had Molly over to watch movies, but eventually she had to leave, leaving me alone to hold down the fort. While lying in bed, I heard the sound of a chair being dragged on the deck. I got up and peered out the window to see a stranger, an unknown man sitting on a deck chair in the darkness, staring up at me. I called out for Molly, but it was not her. Curiosity and fear battled within me as I returned to the window. The stranger was still there, unmoving, his presence unnerving. Summoning my courage, I spoke, and I saw his shoulders shudder, as if he were laughing uncontrollably, accompanied by a strange, wheezing whistle. Then I heard the back door being pushed and the front door forced open. I ran back to my room to hide. At 14, I was terrified and powerless. I closed the window and drew the curtains, not daring to move until Mom returned home. The terror of that night still haunts me. This was the night I nearly lost my life as a child. We were a family of 5. I was 10, my older brother 14, and my little sister 5. It was a Friday night when a dreaded phone call shattered our calm. My mom, in tears, was on the line with the hospital about my brother being hit by a car. In the ensuing chaos, my parents grabbed coats, rescued my little sister, and hurried out, leaving me behind. After my parents left, I retreated to my room, trying to distract myself by playing my Star Wars video game. Though I kept playing, a gnawing worry for my brother lingered, and the silence of the empty house only amplified the tension. It was well past midnight, and every creak of the house echoed in the darkness. I tried to ease my fears until I heard the front door creak open. Unable to ignore it, I cautiously moved to the banister overlooking the living room. There, in the pitch-black space, I saw 3 tall, ominous figures standing silently. Terrified by what I saw, I rushed back to my room and quietly closed the door. Knowing they might have heard me, I scrambled to my closet, opened it as silently as possible, and dove behind boxes and bags of clothes. I was completely hidden, but my heart pounded with dread as I awaited the inevitable. Then, I heard footsteps approaching my room. I listened in frozen terror as they moved toward my bed and then to my closet. The closet door creaked open slowly, and for what felt like an endless 20 seconds, I sat there, paralyzed with fear, praying I wouldn't be discovered. After what felt like an eternity, the intruders finally left, and nearly an hour later, I heard my parents return. Rushing downstairs, I found the front door left ajar and several valuables missing. That night had gone from bad to worse, and I still wonder if the intruder who opened my closet ever saw me hiding. I narrowly escaped death. There was a time when I was home alone for an entire week while still a teenager living with my parents. A very unusual circumstance because my parents rarely ventured out. My mom's wealthy friend, Patty, had invited them on an all-expenses-paid trip, leaving the house solely in my care. Being an only child, I was left entirely to myself. We resided in Newark, Ohio, a town in Licking County. Indeed, our county was famously known as Licking County. Our parents' old house featured dense woods in the backyard and sat on a quiet road that saw only a handful of cars passing by each day. We boasted a huge deck that overlooked the woods, accompanied by a generously sized backyard, a small fish pond, and even an above-ground swimming pool. This all transpired on a Thursday night, a detail I recall clearly because I was discussing weekend plans with my friends that very day. This memorable experience took place in July of 2013. I was sitting out on the deck, smoking weed with my speaker blasting music, when that was about the time everything began. I distinctly thought I heard a voice emerging from deep within the woods. I then lowered the music and listened carefully for a few moments. When nothing repeated, I turned the volume back up. However, as the music resumed its loud presence, I once again heard a voice coming from the woods. This time, I switched off the music completely and focused on listening for a longer stretch. Sure enough, a voice began calling again from the woods, confirming that I wasn't simply imagining it. It was a male voice, clearly saying, "Hey, over here." Though the voice sounded somewhat distant, it was not too far away. The woods lay roughly 20 to 30 yards from the deck, which is exactly where the sound was emanating from. I never imagined in a million years that someone would be calling directly for me. I assumed it might just be some kids engaged in a game of manhunt. Yet, the voice repeated itself, saying, "Hey, over here, we need help." That time, I realized the tone was too deep for a child, and when a voice cries out for help, it is inherently concerning. I began to feel increasingly uneasy, wondering if those desperate yells were meant for me. Suddenly, I heard the voice shout, "Straight in front of you. Please come help us," coming directly from the woods before me. A sinking feeling told me it was aimed at me, so I reluctantly responded, "Who is that?" To which the reply was, "We just need help. We're stuck in the woods." I then inquired, "What does that mean?" And the voice answered, "Just please come help straight in front of you." I rose from my seat, walked down the steps of the deck onto the grass, and proceeded slowly toward the woods while calling out, "I'm coming. Where are you?" Instantly, the voice responded, "Right in front of you. I see you." I then asked, "Wait, are you alone or with someone?" but received no further reply. Halting about halfway into the woods, I was gripped by a terrible feeling in my gut. I began walking backwards, retracing my steps toward the house and the deck. I was so frightened that I did not even dare to turn my back on the dark woods, as it had taken me far too long to realize how suspicious this entire situation was. I managed to make it back to the deck, and to my relief, the voice ceased speaking. If they had truly seen me, and if this were genuine, I felt they would have at least shouted, "Where are you going?" It was as if they knew I was onto them, although I couldn't tell if there was just one intruder or perhaps three. All I could conclude was that being stuck in the woods simply made no sense, especially if he or they were capable of literally seeing me. I even wondered, did their shirt get caught on a branch? In any case, I hurried inside the house and locked all the doors for my own safety. I then settled into the living room for a while, still high, and perhaps that state of being so relaxed initially made me more willing to trust the situation, despite the obvious danger. After that, I heard the voice again from outside, but this time it was much closer, undeniably coming from the backyard rather than from the woods. I also heard the sound of water splashing, which might have been from the pool or the pond. I quickly hurried to the window to see what was happening. At first, I saw no one, but then the voice spoke again, saying, "I see you," accompanied by a mocking laugh. That was when I noticed him. It turned out to be a single guy. At least one person was clearly visible, hidden behind the pool on the far side, and all I could discern was his head. It was so dark that nothing else could be made out except his dark, medium-length hair. I immediately closed the blinds and tried my best to ignore him, hoping that he might lose interest if he realized I wasn't giving him any attention. I figured he was probably a twisted, deranged individual who took pleasure in tormenting people, and I did not want to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. However, my breaking point came when I heard a horrible, aggressive banging on the window where I had just closed the blinds, and on the other side, the man was screaming for help. In a surge of panic, I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Fuck off, you freak! The police are coming!" I repeated this over and over, trying desperately to sound even crazier than he did. I then heard him begin to laugh on the other side of the glass, and as his laughter gradually faded away, I assumed that he had finally walked away. I slumped back down onto the couch, trembling, shaking, and completely out of breath. I remained there for quite some time, and it seemed as though the guy had truly given up. Remarkably, I still managed to get a good night's sleep that evening, largely because weed helped me relax. I often wonder if I would have handled the situation differently had I not been high. In the end, the whole ordeal left me far more paranoid about who I allowed near my door. At 23 years old, I still live at home with my parents. One day, when both of them were away, I found myself outside playing basketball in the front yard. While I was immersed in my game, I casually looked up at one of the upstairs windows and saw a woman standing there. She wasn't my mom, nor was she my sister. She was a random woman I had never seen before. It appears that when she noticed my gaze upon her, she quickly disappeared from the window. When I went back inside and headed upstairs to check the lounge room, she was nowhere to be found. I methodically searched every single room available to me, every bedroom, the bathroom, and every closet. Then I proceeded to check the downstairs areas, which included the living room, kitchen, dining room, one of the bedrooms, and several additional closets. Finally, I examined the basement, although I highly doubted that she could be hiding there. The basement is small, furnished with a couple of couches, a bar, and 2 closets. There simply weren't many places for someone to conceal themselves. However, when I opened the second closet door, I became incredibly scared, since I couldn't imagine any other spot within the house where someone might hide. It was the last unchecked area I could think of. I yanked the door open as if I were ripping off a Band-Aid, and just like I had with the previous closet, I immediately shoved myself into the closet, prepared to jump on her if she happened to be there. Yet, all I found was a jumble of coats and coat hangers, leaving me utterly confused. I refused to question my own sanity, because I knew without any doubt that I had seen that woman. It wasn't the sort of vivid image one could simply imagine on a whim. I returned to the middle floor and screamed at the top of my lungs that whoever was in the house needed to get the F out immediately. I screamed so loudly that our next-door neighbor came over, concerned about my well-being. I explained to him that I had literally just seen a woman at our upstairs window while I was playing basketball. He came inside and helped me search again. When we still couldn't find her, I was forced to assume that she must have snuck out through the back door, which, incidentally, I had unlocked when I went to grab the basketball from the yard. After that, my neighbor left. I then locked all the doors, called my parents, and told them the unbelievable story. Although they weren't too thrilled, they asked me to check that nothing valuable had been stolen. I did just that, and fortunately, everything of worth remained in place. Fast forward to later that night. I went to sleep after checking the house one more time for peace of mind. However, falling asleep was extremely difficult because my mind was racing for obvious reasons. Most people cannot truly relate to the terror of seeing a stranger at their window from inside their own house. Yet, my own restlessness turned out to be helpful in this situation, and here is why. I was finally beginning to drift off when I suddenly heard noises coming from the opposite side of me. There was a fan running above, so the room wasn't completely silent, which is why I did not immediately turn to the other side upon hearing the first sound. However, as the noise continued, it began to sound distinctly human-like. I then turned toward the other side, and there she was, emerging from under my bed. She rose up tall above the bed, and I screamed with a volume even louder than before. In that split second, I leaped out of bed, tackled her to the floor, and gripped her throat while demanding, "Who are you?" At that precise moment, my doorbell rang. My neighbor appeared once more. I picked up the tall, dirty-looking woman off the floor and dragged her toward the front door as she struggled, scratching at me. I still bear 2 scars on my right arm from the claws she left behind. I then opened my front door for my neighbor, who let himself in and helped me restrain the woman. It was at that moment that I called the police. Throughout the entire wait for law enforcement, the woman continued to scream and curse at both my neighbor and me, threatening us all the while. To put it bluntly, she looked and acted like a meth head who was currently suffering from withdrawals. When the police finally arrived, one of the officers immediately recognized who the woman was, having dealt with her on multiple occasions before. Her name was conveniently Karen, and it was strangely satisfying to watch her be ushered into the back of the police car. I expressed my sincere gratitude to my neighbor for coming to my aid so quickly. And that night, my mind continued to race. Yet, instead of being completely terrified, although I still was a little, I felt an overwhelming sense of satisfaction that I cannot fully explain.